the conversation, I think you said that Hamas is not a terrorist group,
Mm-hmm.
but in their charter, it says something about wanting to kill all the Jews. So how do you reconcile that?
First of all, they don't say this in the charter. They say terrible things about the Jews, so I quote in the Quran. The Hamas is part of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And part of that liberation organization is leftist, secularist, part of it is nationalist, centralist, and part of it is religious. All the anti-colonialist movements in the Arab world were religious, secular, and centralist. And when they were united, they succeeded in decolonizing the countries. And when one group was more dominant than the others, it lost the support of the people, and people went to another ideological faction, not necessarily because they identified with the ideology of that faction, because they wanted to give it a chance. So in this respect, the Hamas cannot be reduced to its charter. Like the PLO could not have been reduced to its charter, which was also talking about replacing Israel with a secular state, and was considered, as you know, the PLO was considered a terrorist organization for many, many years on the basis of the charter. Charter is not the only way to judge a movement. You judge a movement by understanding the origins of its emergence, by the composition of the people who run it, and the composition of the people who support it. This is the most serious analysis of the Hamas. And the Hamas, in this respect, is a political Islamic group that exists in many other liberation movements in the Arab world, that is particularly now popular in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. By the way, it's not popular among the refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan. It's not popular among the Palestinian exilic communities, and it's not even popular among the Palestinians in Israel. So for a certain group of Palestinians under the yoke of occupation, very ruthless occupation in the West Bank, and under the inhuman siege in Gaza, they seem to be the only liberation or the only faction within the liberation movement that is trying through armed struggle to bring an end to this. This does not turn them into a terrorist organization. They do use terrorism, as the Israelis do, as the Fatah did, as the ANC did, as the FLN did. Yes, both colonialist regimes and occupiers use terror, and those who fight them use terror. The definition of the meaning behind defining the Hamas as a terrorist organization is to delegitimize the whole Palestinian liberation organization movement and the right of the Palestinians to defend themselves. So in that respect, I think it's important to realize, if you want to get reconciliation in Israel and Palestine, you will have to legitimize the Palestinian liberation movement with all its factions.
Well, I think that Palestinians have a right to freedom and good quality of life. And I also think it was pretty bad what Hamas did to Israeli civilians on October 7th. I don't think that those two ideas are in conflict or contradiction. I think that we should be able to wish and hope and try to create a prosperous future for Palestinians while simultaneously condemning any terrorism from anyone in the world. And Hamas's terrorism was pretty abhorrent. I mean, what they did was pretty seemed pretty egregious. Should we not condemn the terrorism that Hamas inflicted? And
there's a difference between condemning terrorism and calling a group by essence as a terrorist organization. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Israel.
So you would certainly condemn the terrorism that Hamas did.
Yes. And I would remind your viewer that the terrorism Israel inflicted on the Palestinians is far worse and continued for more than 120 years. Let's not forget that. So it doesn't justify the terrorism, but it gives you a context. There's always a difference, and that's our role as intellectuals. We have to explain. And people sometimes say to us, oh, if you explain, then you justify. No. Explanation, justification is not the same. And why is it important? Because if you say that the Hamas is just a purely terrorist organization, then it uses terror for the sake of terror. because they're terrorists. They like to terrorize people, man. Or according to the Israeli narrative, because Iran tells them to kill Jews. That's a simplistic American reductionist mainstream media that buys into the Israeli narrative. But this is so ahistorical, so ignorant of the history, both of the Hamas, of the Palestinian liberation movement. We as historians are far more familiar with the way that this all developed. This is not a group of people who are just born terrorists. Half of the Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip, half of them were born, are below 23 years old, which means the only reality they know is siege, land siege, sea blockade, and 4 brutal Israeli attacks from the land, sea, and air on them. This is a ghetto that was 4 times bombed by F-16s and F-35s. And I don't know, I've only once experienced, and I was 5 kilometers away from a bomb that was dropped in Jenin. I must tell you, I'm still traumatized from being 5 kilometers away from that bomb. This is a population, 1.9 population of people, traumatized with bombing that nobody, I think, apart from people in the Second World War, ever experienced. The number, the TNT that was dropped by Israel throughout these 4 bombings is far worse than the TNT dropped in many places in the Second World War. You have to remember this when you talk about the violence and all of it. So this is something that creates an explanation, not justification. It creates an explanation for many things that are happening. And therefore, framing one group as a terrorist, the other one is not a terrorist. The state is as much a terrorist state, Israel, as Hamas is a terrorist. And both a terrorist organization, both of them are not very helpful definition, and neither Israel is a terrorist state or the Hamas is a terrorist organization. What is essential is to look at the processes that can lead to the end of violence rather than using language that would perpetuate the violence.
I appreciate understanding how the origins of Hamas came about and that the Palestinian people have suffered. That being said, it seems that between the Hamas charter, things they say, things they do indicate a general anti-Semitic agenda. Can't both be true? Can't it be true that Palestinians have suffered as a result of Israeli rule and that Hamas explicitly perpetuates anti-Semitic agenda? Is that, can't those things both be true?
No, that's nonsense. That's nonsense. Anyone who's familiar with the Palestinians, when they talk about the Jews, they're talking about the Zionists. They don't talk about the Jews. A Jew in America is of no interest for the Hamas. Anti-Semitism is when you hate Jews because who they are. Anti-Zionism is because you are against Jews because of what they are doing. There was a very famous interview with the founder of the Hamas, Sheikh Yassin, who said, if Muslims would have done to us in Gaza what the Israelis would have done to us, I would have advocated the same policy against these Muslims. And that gives you in a nutshell this idea that take it out. This is not anti-Semitism. This is a Palestinian struggle for liberation and freedom. Now, anti-colonialist struggles have groups that maybe some of us who are secular or maybe are not very religious, we like, and some of them we don't like. Some of them have vision for the future we share. Some of them have vision for the future we don't share. What we do accept, at least if we support struggles against occupation, colonization, and ethnic cleansing, that they are part of a just struggle for liberation and freedom. Now, after the liberation, after the freedom, we can then start arguing what kind of a liberated country we want. Do we accept a certain theocratic vision for the future? Would we Would we like to see maybe a communist future? Maybe we would like to see a social democratic future. This is all open for discussion. But what most of the Palestinians, including the Hamas, is involved in is an attempt to end occupation, ethnic cleansing, oppression. It's not a project of killing Jews. This is not a Nazi project of the elimination of the Jewish people. This is an anti-colonialist struggle that, yes, has chapters which are immoral, chapters that should be condemned, but let's not forget the big picture. And the big picture is a struggle of a colonized indigenous people against a project of settler colonialism, which is Zionism, to displace them and replace them with Jews. And that is what they're fighting against. And then we can argue whether they're fighting justly according to international law or not. I would fully go into this discussion, but I would not infer from their actions to the origin and the essence of who they are.